Hello and welcome to the latest installment of PSG Talking. I'm your host, Ed, and on today's show, we're talking about Kylian Mbappe's controversial comments, the latest on Xavi Simons, and a little Euros preview as well. Joining me today is Jonathan Johnson from CBS Sports. Jonathan, welcome back to the show. How are things on your end?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Thanks a lot for having me on. And it's been a while, so I guess a lot to get to.
Yeah, a lot to get to, and let's just jump right into it because there was a press conference earlier this week that just lit up social media. I know my feed was just going; it was buzzing. Everyone was commenting about Kylian Mbappe. He made news with his comments. I'm going to pull out what I think most inflammatory one, and it was about his playing time just at the start of the season. So I'll read the quote and then get your reaction. He said, quote, "I was made to understand that I would no longer play for PSG." This was after informing the club of his desire to leave at the end of the season. "I was told right to my face and quite violently. So I was convinced that I wasn't going to play." What do you think Mbappe's motive behind these comments is?
I mean, I think in many ways, sort of Mbappe is probably wanting to say what he feels is sort of his side of the story, and sort of leave having at least sort of clarified that. I mean, the one thing about this that I would say is I don't really think it tells us that much that we didn't already know. I mean, at least those of us who sort of have followed PSG long enough and sort of followed the Mbappe transfer saga, we all know that there was a bit of a blow up with the club after he opted out of the optional final year of his contract. Obviously frustration on the club side, but when you leave the power in the player's hands like that, that's always the risk that you run. That they take a decision that you don't like, you don't agree with, and that was the situation that PSG were in at the time. I think as well we saw that it was quite a forceful situation because at the end of the day he wasn't taken on the pre-season tour, so I think he played the first friendly, which was behind closed doors against Le Havre or something like that, and then didn't feature again until the league was underway. So that was quite a significant period of time out of action. So, it was, even from the outside looking in without sort of that explanation, I think people knew that it was quite a significant situation and a very tricky one on all sides. So I think really, when you look at sort of the context as a whole for sort of what Mbappe was saying in the press conference, I think it's a way to sort of give a bit of clarity on that so that, sort of the time for discussion about it kind of ends before the Euro starts, and to be able to be focused on the job in hand with Les Bleus this summer in Germany, and sort of so that it also doesn't, I guess, tarnish sort of the start of his time with Real Madrid once he does finally, link up with the club there. So I think it was probably more sort of an absence of alternatives as to why, sort of he took this opportunity now to sort of air those grievances, because I think the timing of them, had they come out at any other time, probably would have been even more awkward.
And maybe who it could have been Nasser, but someone at PSG, there was a report that came out that someone at PSG was quoted as saying, "Absolutely no class. Nasser has never dictated the slightest decision. Luis Enrique even said it himself, but despite everything, Mbappe says something and everyone prints it as if it were the truth." Kind of talk about where you think this bad blood between Mbappe and Nasser is coming from. I mean, you talk about, look at it kind of broader in context. From what I can tell, all the president did was probably what a lot of other football presidents would do, which is offer the best player in the world the best contract that they possibly could, something that a player couldn't pass up. And ultimately, it was Mbappe's decision to sign that contract and stay at PSG. He could have gone to Real Madrid. In fact, there is now reporting that PSG were trying to push Mbappe out last summer, but he stayed. So with all that being said, talk about where you think the bad blood between the president and Mbappe is coming from. And do you think that Mbappe colluded with Real Madrid so that he would leave PSG on a free?
I don't know. I don't know if I would say that he colluded with Real Madrid, but I think there are certain realities of the situation regarding that extension that Mbappe signed Obviously it was hailed as a masterstroke at the time, but there was, once it became obvious that the power was in Mbappe's hands for that final year, there were logical questions about, sort of um, how solid really PSG's chances were of being able to keep Mbappe for that final year of the contract. And I think Real Madrid would have been aware of that sort of opportunity coming up. And the other thing was that part of the deal was that PSG would basically do what they started to do last summer, the summer before, but because of the extension of Kylian Mbappe's contract, it was almost impossible to do because of the financial constraints. So there's a little bit of sort of blame on both sides, I guess, but both sides are perhaps guilty of not quite being realistic about the situation. One on PSG's side, because at the end of the day, when you leave the power in the players' hands, this is always something that can happen, no matter how much you convince yourself that it won't. And on sort of Mbappe's side, I think it was extremely naive to think that PSG would have the ability to, the wiggle room necessary in the transfer market to make those kind of changes, especially if you bear in mind that at that time, Neymar and Messi were still on the books. So it was, extremely difficult for PSG to, make those sweeping changes. Would PSG have had as good a season as the one just gone had they brought in all of those players a year before? Possibly not. And I think the reality was always going to be that from PSG. I mean, you just recall the scenes when Mbappe was unveiled on the pitch. The year on the shirt was 2025. It was quite clear at that time that PSG considered this an extension until then. So for Mbappe to cut that short by a year, yeah, of course it wasn't what PSG wanted, and that I think explains a lot of the bad blood. But let's also look at the reality of the situation. I think Mbappe's mum, especially in terms of his entourage, has grown in power and influence over the last couple of years, especially since that extension to the contract. And I think that power struggle between Nasser and Mbappe's mum was bound to sort of come to a head. And really, the bottom line in all of this is that everybody has always known that Mbappe saw his future at some point to be determined with Real Madrid. Obviously, we know that time is now, but I think many people in Paris maybe were kidding themselves that it might be further away in the future than it actually was. So I think a mix of that really sort of contributed to this sort of perceived bad blood between Mbappe and the club. But yeah, it's not good to sort of see the way it's ended, considering sort of what PSG gave Mbappe in terms of the platform to develop into the player that he is now, but also what Mbappe has given to PSG in terms of the performances on the pitch, the silverware he's contributed towards the records that have been set as well. So, I do think it's a shame that there is a bit of a sort of sour feeling to all of this, but unfortunately, that's part and parcel of modern football.
Yeah, and what we don't know is with the jersey with 2025, was there a gentleman's agreement? Was there something outside of the contract, a handshake deal? We really don't know. I mean, we talk about the exit clause, his loyalty bonuses, and that's still a point of contention. And we don't really know what was said in the negotiating room, what was agreed upon. But I guess it really just comes down to what's in print. That's what's going to really stick, not a handshake deal. So that's still being all sorted out. And then just one more quick thing on Mbappe. He couldn't wait even a month or so, or wait to his official unveiling at Real Madrid. I mean, he's technically still a PSG player to the end of the month, and he's calling Real Madrid the biggest club in the world, and it's his dream. And maybe that's true, right? But you're still technically a PSG player. You've been here since 2018. It kind of is taking a little bit of a dig at the club and the fans as well. It seemed like he's really playing to the Real Madrid fan base. I don't know, just any reaction on those comments so soon after he does make the switch?
I mean, I think you have to take the context into account as well, and that context is key here because there's reports that sort of Mbappe hasn't been paid a portion of what he's owed, and that could also sort of influence his willingness to speak so publicly, and maybe he wouldn't have been speaking so freely, had that relationship not been compromised. So, we'll see if there's really sort of truth to those reports, but that is something to also consider. But I think what Mbappe is saying is what you'd expect anybody to say when they're joining a new club. They want to make a good impression, and everybody in world football knows that Kylian Mbappe, grew up as a Real Madrid fan and wanted to play for the club at some point. So I think he's saying what many people sort of expect him to say. You've also got to bear in mind that he's, been announced as Real Madrid's new signing less than 48 hours after they confirmed a record-extending 15th Champions League title. So you're kind of obliged, I think, in many ways to mention sort of, the size and the stature of the club. Given everything they've achieved and another successful season that they've just closed the book on.
This is something that is kind of a lot of American fans like myself. Kevin Durant, I don't know if you're familiar with him when he made the switch from Oklahoma City to Golden State Warriors in the midst of their dynasty. It's sort of a criticism that's lobbed at Kylian Mbappe because it does seem like he's trophy chasing. It does seem like he's signing up to sort of be secondary or even maybe in the third place behind Bellingham and Vinny Jr. And kind of letting those guys carry him to a Champions League title, and he's going there to say I've got one too, because you look at his contemporaries, Foden and Erling Haaland and Manchester City, they all have a Champions League title now, and he doesn't. And sort of, do you think that's a fair criticism that he is perhaps chasing a Champions League title and taking the easy way out instead of maybe staying at PSG or going to his other dream club, AC Milan, that he grew up supporting? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think you look at sort of the overall return from Mbappe's time at PSG and what they've managed to do in the Champions League the last couple of years. They've managed to make one final, so they've gone to 3 semi-finals in that time. Obviously, it's extremely frustrating for Mbappe that he wasn't fully fit at the time that they reached the final in 2020, but they still got there during his time with the club. I think he and PSG, they will all know that they missed a huge chance this season to, arguably their best opportunity. If not winning it, then getting to the final again. And that's at the end of the day on the collective for the failure over 2 legs against Dortmund. But I think in terms of the chasing sort of the Champions League trophy and the Ballon d'Or, yes, I mean, understandably, he wants to potentially win the Champions League, and you can argue that his chances are enhanced going to Real. But instead of looking at sort of what the others have and what he doesn't have, you can flip it around, and you can say that Kylian Mbappe is the only one in that conversation who's got a World Cup. Maybe that'll change in 2 years' time, but at this moment in time, he's got the World Cup. Those guys don't. So there's always going to be that sort of aspect in terms of sort of the overall kind of career stats. Obviously, I think the ideal scenario for Mbappe arriving at Real Madrid would have been that they didn't win the Champions League, and there was sort of an obvious need for him in the team. I think that's the thing that's perhaps most clear at the moment, that although Kylian Mbappe walks into that starting 11, he doesn't necessarily walk into an obvious spot in that starting 11, because the position that's most wide open is the one that he is not yet fully comfortable in, and that's the sort of central attacking berth. He's still much better in that role, cutting in from the left, where he gets most of his goals, and that is a role obviously played by Vinny Jr. So there is an expectation as well that there might be some sort of power struggle between them, over the years to come in Madrid once the excitement of Mbappe's arrival dies down. I mean, for Bellingham as well, he's had an excellent season. Expected to chip in a bit more going forward than perhaps he would have been usually, but he's been up to the task and done extremely well. But you've got to bear in mind that this is sort of Bellingham's first real season of proper success anywhere, because as much as he learned a lot and developed really impressively with Dortmund, he, didn't win those titles. So suddenly he's getting a taste for that. But Kylian Mbappé has, been prolific in terms of the titles that he won in France. Obviously, Vinny Jr. is a bit different. He's now been a Champions League final winner, scoring in two separate finals, the one over Liverpool and the one over Dortmund. So that's a bit of a separate debate. And that's why I think sort of it's, I think the only one who really can rival Mbappe in terms of the sort of superstar stakes and sort of what they've achieved in the game so far would be Vinicius Jr. And if you're really doing a direct comparison, Mbappe still has that international success. And if Mbappe helps to lead France to the Euros this summer, that's another feather in his cap. There's no guarantee that Brazil will win Copa America or England will win the Euro. I'm not saying that England should be written off. I think they're pre-tournament favourites along with France for a reason. But, there's an equal chance, I'd say, at this moment in time that Mbappe adds, the Euro to his list of accolades. And it's something that he spoke publicly in that press conference about, sort of being the biggest setback of his career so far when they went out in 2020 unexpectedly.
And we're going to get your Euros preview here at the end. But let's switch gears. Let's get away from Mbappe into another player causing a little bit of drama at PSG, and that's Xavi Simons. He's now pushed his decision of where he's going to play next season until after the Euros. Before it was said he would make his decision before. This is a guy who's had one of the most oddest career trajectories in the game today. Recently, he was quoted as saying, "I want to concentrate fully on the tournament first," as if he's not going to be asked while he's representing Netherlands. But I digress about his future. With all that being said, where do you think Xavi Simons ends up playing next season?
It's a really good question. It's difficult to say at this moment in time. I think a lot of it depends on what happens in the Euro. Wherever he plays, I think he has to start. There's a strong argument for continuing, what he started with Leipzig last season. But again, it's a temporary fix. There's also, I guess, a gamble element in a big club potentially coming in and offering PSG a lot of money off the back of a very good Euro. But then again, PSG wouldn't be losing a player that is integral to their plans so far, because Luis Enrique hasn't had the opportunity to coach him and sort of put him into his starting 11. But, I do feel that PSG have a really huge, talent on their hands, and one that they want to, make the most of. Just the big issue at the moment is sort of the way that deal was struck in order to bring him back from PSV Eindhoven after just 1 year. And it seems like this next season, in terms of how that works out, is going to be a little tricky. So I can understand, Simons wanting to buy a bit of time, and to be honest, that's probably quite useful for the clubs as well. But one thing's for sure, I don't think it's going to be a perfect scenario for all parties, whatever gets decided. There's going to have to be some element of compromise somewhere. And, I think as well, it's understandable that Simons sort of wants to have some sort of clarity in terms of sort of where his career is developing, where he's sort of projecting his future after that season on loan. And, I think that's something that, might be even more pressing in terms of a need after the Euros if he has a real breakout tournament. And also think as well, if that does happen, the expectation, from the PSG fan base will be that, Simons returns to Paris and sort of plays a key part in the new look, PSG. So I do think it's a big decision that they have to make. Luis Enrique has spoken publicly in the past about sort of his desire to, have Xavi Simons available to him at some point in the future. And I do think that ultimately the casting vote has to be with him. If he can see a way to have Simons sort of in his squad and boosting PSG next season, then that's sort of what PSG should seek to achieve. At the end of the day, PSG aren't obliged to go out and sort of spend the money that Mbappe was earning on his replacement. I think it's better served using it for just a few intelligent tweaks here and there to what was quite a promising squad and sort of overall collective performance last season, and then sort of going from there.
And there's been speculation about Xavi Simons' contract, whether or not he has basically full autonomy if he goes out on loan. PSG have already said they're not going to transfer him because PSV Eindhoven would get a substantial transfer fee from that, a percentage from that transfer fee. So the perfect solution seems to be him coming back to PSG. He guaranteed starting spot almost. He would pretty much be the face of the club, I would think. I don't know why he wouldn't come back unless Luis Enrique really doesn't rate him. I don't know. But earlier we talked about Mbappe having that contract and having all the power. Is this a situation where if PSG can bring him back, should they flex that muscle and say, we have a contract, you're under contract until 2027. You may not want to be here, but you signed it, and we'll figure it out later. I mean, do you think PSG should play that card if, in fact, they can contractually?
I mean, I don't think that's an ideal scenario because at the end of the day, you don't want to force somebody to be somewhere or buy into a situation against their will. But also at the same time, if there is a clear vision for him, at the end of the day, he is the one who decided to accept the return to PSG and then the loan out to Leipzig. I don't see why he would have such an issue if PSG turn around to him and say, right, we feel that you're ready now. You're going to be a key part of this from here on in. And like I said, it depends, largely on how Luis Enrique sees it. And you look at sort of PSG's midfield from this season just gone, and you do feel like there maybe is still a space for him, sort of in the three-man midfield, sort of alongside Zaire-Emery and Vitinha. Also, that space could be filled by sort of more of an anchor midfielder, but you could get a bit flexible as well and sort of push him forward into a sort of more attacking midfielder role, similar to the one that we've seen Dembele playing at times this season. I think in terms of the goals, Gonzalo Ramos already showed in the second half of the season that he's rounding into the sort of form that PSG essentially bought him for. So that's, I think those are all things to consider. And at the end of the day, if it means giving PSV Eindhoven a bit of money in order to make sure that things go smoothly and that PSG can have him now, then to me that qualifies as a smart way of using the Kylian Mbappe funds as opposed to going out and trying to buy some of these big names that have been mentioned so far, like Kvaratskhelia. There's rumours as well about the Russian goalkeeper who might come in as Donnarumma's number 2 again. Quite bizarre, really, that PSG would consider spending that sort of sum of money on somebody who's not going to be a starting player. So that's, I think, to me, Xavi Simons, if you can guarantee that he's going to be part of the squad and able to begin next season with PSG, but it costs a little bit of money to sort it out, then to me, given his development, and especially if that development continues into the Euros, it's money. It would be money well spent.
And maybe if you do a deal and PSV Eindhoven gets some of the transfer fee, maybe that between the two clubs there's a good relationship because that's a club that always has really promising young players. So maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world long term. We got 2 more topics for you, just real quick. Transfer targets. We kind of talked a little bit about it. I'm going to lump 2 players together, and you just give me your thoughts on whether you think that they're realistic and if they could make the jump to PSG this summer. You've got Julian Alvarez at Manchester City, which is kind of surprising that they would be willing to let him leave, but that's all the reporting seems to be that they would listen to offers. And then Jeremy Frimpong over at Bayer Leverkusen, who had a great goal for Netherlands here recently leading up to the Euros. So any of those 2 players you think could make the jump to PSG?
Yeah, it's two interesting names. I think in terms of Frimpong, it's funny, I've seen him linked with Villa as well. So maybe if he joins one of my 2 teams, I'll be happy either way this summer. But I think Frimpong mainly would make sense if you're sort of considering the possibility that Achraf Hakimi moves on. Obviously, we know Mbappe leaving will have an impact on Hakimi, given how close they are. I think Hakimi was much, much better this past season than he was the season before. But I do still think that, if a strong offer is put forward to PSG, they probably would still consider it. So that one, I think, it depends. I don't see a world really where PSG sort of have two very, top quality right wing backs, even if there would be cover needed. In a lot of these different situations, especially with the fact that Mukiele doesn't really seem to have much of a future under Luis Enrique. But you're right, the Alvarez speculation is far more intriguing. Given PSG's options in attack already, you'd have to assume that would not be good news, particularly for Randall Kolo Muani. But equally, it could generate a lot of competition with Gonzalo Ramos as well. Alvarez is quite versatile. He's a prolific and predatory goal scorer. Still very young as well, but also quite proven with Manchester City. He's shown that he is capable of sort of playing in a bit of a more withdrawn sort of support striker, or even like makeshift number 10 position. So that's quite interesting in terms of his profile as well. And I think a lot of that speculation comes from the fact that Alvarez is a bit fed up of being a consistent goal threat, but still sort of being essentially pushed into the super sub mold at City. So yeah, I think a goal scorer of his quality is always going to be interesting for a lot of clubs when they're potentially on the market. And if he was available, then I would expect PSG to look, but there would have to be some sort of intelligent restructuring of the attack after Mbappe's departure. But in terms of potential efficiency in front of goal, and if Luis Enrique was considering maybe a slight system change, I think PSG could do a lot worse than looking at somebody like Alvarez. So for me, I think if he is on the market, you definitely look into it. And maybe have to make some really hard decisions about some of the players, even some of the new arrivals last summer, and whether it's really worth persevering with them, or if there's potentially a market for them in terms of, being loaned out, and then, we see if they maybe earn a permanent move elsewhere. So, I'd say a similar situation as well to Ugarte. With regards to the potential decision Luis Enrique has ahead of him this summer about him. But, when somebody like Alvarez, with the record that he's had in such a short space of time, potentially becomes available to you, it does look like pretty smart business for any elite club. And, that doesn't just go for PSG, that goes for, pretty much any top club right now.
I think that's really smart about PSG. Maybe if they did bring him in, making some difficult decision, whether it's Kolo Muani or whoever, because you can't stockpile attackers at all, or kind of similar. I highly rate Gonzalo Ramos. I hope he doesn't leave. I feel like if Alvarez came in, he would take some minutes away, and I don't know if that would be good. So I don't know. Maybe it's one PSG should pass on, but if they do bring him on, yeah, they're going to have to make some difficult decisions about their attack. All right, Jonathan, we got one more for you. Euros set to kick off in Germany, as you mentioned, June 14th. I got a two-part question for you. Who do you think wins the tournament? And give me a PSG player that's going to be participating in the tournament that you think is just going to really break out and perform well, and everyone's going to be talking about him. And you can't say Mbappe now because he's not going to be a PSG player.
Well, I wouldn't say that Mbappe really qualifies as sort of a breakout star these days. So
that's true. Yeah,
I'm going to say I'm going to fancy France to go all the way and win it. I think they'll right the wrongs of a couple of years ago when they lost out unexpectedly in 2020. And I will say that the player who I think will impress the most is Vitinha, because I think a lot of people still sleep on Vitinha despite him having had a very good season at PSG overall. I think he seems to be growing in importance for Portugal now. I saw that he got an assist the other day in one of their friendlies ahead of Euro 2024. And it just feels to me like he's potentially primed to have that kind of tournament where people really wake up and sort of see the quality that he does have, and sort of the consistency that he's added to his game over the last season with PSG. So for me, I think that is certainly sort of the pairing that I'm looking at ahead of the Euros. France to win, but Vitinha to be one of the main stars.
For me, I like Portugal mainly because of Vitinha. I just think they have a really good team. They're in a reasonably easy group in Group F with Turkey, Georgia, and the Czech Republic. So yeah, I'm liking Portugal to get out and do some damage. France will be a favorite. Surprised you didn't go with England. A lot of people picking them, but it'll be a fun tournament set to kick off in June. So several PSG players are participating, something to give us to watch. So it'll be interesting. All right, Jonathan. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Make sure you read Jonathan's work over at CBS Sports, and of course, follow him on X at John Legossip. And of course, thank you for listening to this fine show. And until next time, bye for now.